Welcome to today's Obit3r Short, which is on the subject of emergency law during the pandemic. Policy responses in the time of pandemic bring particular focus on rule of law questions. A government must bring in emergency legislation at times where it's essential, but it still needs to follow the basic principles of the rule of law. I'll reflect on developments in the UK with localised tiered regulations and separate legislation which provides additional powers to police and state officers. A.V. Dicey, perhaps the founder of the principle of the rule of law, suggested that the law should not be too wide, discretionary or arbitrary in its nature, and it should also apply equally to all. Lord Bingham echoed Dicey's comments and suggested that the law needed to be certain and clear. Professor Raz argued that it should therefore be capable of providing direction to individuals. Professor Fuller found that a failure in publicising or making the law clear undermined its credibility and disrupted its integrity. Applying these principles to the three-tiered system that the UK government has implemented and the previous lockdowns, well, on the subject of the law applying equally to all, senior civil servants and politicians flouting certain of those rules has undermined the credibility of the rules in the first place, potentially made compliance difficult and enforcement also. On the arbitrary, discretionary or wide powers, the lockdown rules in the Health Protection Regulations 2020 provide the police powers of enforcement against public gatherings and people who stay overnight. But police powers under Schedule 21 of the Coronavirus Act 2020 provide wide-ranging powers to limit movements or require screening, but it only relates to potentially infectious people. So even the police have struggled with this distinction, and they charged 44 cases under the wrong legislation because they are breaches by people who were not potentially infectious. When asked to clarify the rules, senior government ministers have struggled to be able to offer a definitive statement of the law. Whilst the government and local authorities have publicised what the regulations are quite widely, the three-tiered approach, coupled with the fact that the law is changing quite frequently and that it doesn't necessarily cover every element of human behaviour and interaction that we may need to consider, leaves great gaps, adds complexity and makes enforcement by the police very difficult. It makes it very difficult for people with the best will in the world to know exactly what their obligations are and what they are allowed to do. In times like these, it is expected that emergency law will be required, but it needs to be precise, clear, well thought out, and enforceable